It's Dr. Michael Schuck. And congratulations, Dr. Schuck, on your elevation to full professor. And really, there's a misprint in the program, so I want to remedy that. Mike is the founding director of the Hank Center, and we kind of stand on Mike's shoulders, as Father Bosco will say, all the great structures he's given us. So I want to pay tribute to you here, too, Michael. Currently, Mike works in theology, of course, teaching, but his big project these days is key roles in the International Jesuit Ecology Project. Mike graduated from St. Louis University, received his MA in political science from the UFC, University of Chicago, an AMRS from the Divinity School at University of Chicago, and completed his PhD at UFC as well. His main interests in research are Roman Catholic social thought, with special attention to its history, variety, and relationship to other forms of social thought, ancient and modern. He has written on these topics and other more specific moral issues inside of Roman Catholic social thought. So with that, let's welcome Mike to the podium.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike, for your invitation to have me join the panel. And I come with a more than usual degree of humility because I didn't know Dorothy Day. I never got to meet her. And I've never lived in a Catholic worker community. And I know that personal experience is very important when you're reflecting on an intentional community. So I just want to acknowledge that and apologize for any missteps I might make in my discussion. I wanted to make two brief observations and conclude with an analogy. And my first observation concerns the place that Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement holds within what is known as Catholic social thought. It's common for people to understand Catholic social thought as moral teachings on economics or political ethics found in the papal and social encyclical literature or in the letters of episcopacies of national bishops' conferences and so forth. And these are typically identified as beginning with Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum in 1891 on the condition of workers, right up to Pope Francis's Laudato Si on the condition of the natural world, right, in 2015. Now, I think that conventional understanding of Catholic social thought is incomplete. Catholic social thought is more than encyclicals and letters, as important as those are in that tradition. The social thought also includes scholarly writings of university researchers, advocacy work of social justice organizations, grassroots movements, and the writings of the inspired leaders of those movements. And so clearly, the Catholic worker movement is one of those grassroots movements, and Dorothy Day was one of those inspired leaders who is really an important, critical part of Catholic social thought. And I would go so far as to say, and I don't think this is particularly outlandish, but I would say that Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement is probably the single most important contribution of the United States Catholic Church to Catholic social thought in the 20th century. The second observation I want to make concerns the fact that Catholic social thought is not univocal. It doesn't speak in just one voice. Since its birth in the social upheavals of the French Revolution, and really social teachings began before Rerum Novarum, they began as a response to the French Revolution, really, Catholic social thought has comprised these writings and these movements and these organizations whose interpretations of principles like the common good, human rights, subsidiarity, have differed. And they've run the gamut from what we may say conservative interpretations to liberal interpretations to radical interpretations. Roman Catholic social thought has been a healthy argument inside that imagination, that social imagination. And we Catholics don't like to argue, or we're not supposed to argue, or I don't know, but Catholic social thought is a healthy argument. And it's always been that. The troika of interpretation, running the gamut from conservative to liberal to radical, has been in place down to the present. You know, think of the difference between George Weigel, David Hollenbach, and Michael Baxter. If the three of them were here, we would get three quite distinct interpretations of the common good. And that's been the condition of Catholic social thought since the beginning. As much as some people would like to tell a narrative of a much more univocal teaching. So, since its inception in 1933, Catholic worker movement has been the most enduring radical expression of Catholic social teaching, I think. Radical in its nonviolent, non-tax-paying, I would say, in comparison to other movements in Europe, anarchistic response to the economic, political structures of the corporate, capitalist, military structure of the United States. It's been radical in its commitment to alternative communal living in houses of hospitality across the United States. Of the many forms of radical Catholic social thought and action since the 18th century, I would say the Catholic worker movement has been the most enduring in the world. So these are my two observations, and maybe not surprising to say, and not surprising to those of you that are familiar with the Catholic worker, but I think they need to be stated. Or at least I think they need to be stated in a meeting like this. Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement has been the single most important United States contribution to Catholic social thought in the 20th century, and the most enduring radical expression of Catholic social thought in the modern world. Now my analogy. This past fall and winter, I had the privilege of briefly living with the No Dapple water protectors at the Oceti, Sakowin, and Rosebud camps on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota. That experience changed me. While at Standing Rock, I saw hundreds and hundreds of seekers enter the camps with anxious hearts and spirits really wrung out as a result of our culture's kind of rapid-fire, consumer-driven, emotionally brutalizing direction and expectations. And I saw those same hearts and spirits virtually rise from the dead within 24 hours of their engagement at Standing Rock. As they received hospitality, when I drove in, I was a little bit tense. Like, what am I gonna get myself into here? Am I gonna receive a rubber bullet? What's gonna happen? I drove in, and this young Native man looked at me and said, "Welcome home." The hospitality and the camaraderie and a recovered sense of their own bodies as they undertook hard, meaningful work in the campsites for one another. Every morning began at 7:30 a.m. with prayers and ceremony at the Oceti Sakowin camp, and those were voiced in this really enchanting blend of Ojibwe and Lakota and English. And you could feel people kind of restored with a sacred purpose when they get onto their work for the day at the camp, kind of re-entering the rhythm of the day, which was mostly wood chopping, donation sorting, guest orienting, legal counseling, food preparing, fire tending, camp cleaning, and just visiting with one another. what you saw on television of the kind of violence, the protests, that maybe was 2% of what happened at Standing Rock. About 98% was this. It was healing of seekers. The beating heart of the entire operation was the prayer and wisdom speaking offered morning and night by the native elders at the camp's fire circle. They held the moral and spiritual compass. Their simple, powerful message was clear. We're all related. The two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, the crawlers, the swimmers, the winged ones, the plants, the rocks, matakiosin, right? That great Lakota phrase for we're all related. And we two-leggeds have a special responsibility to sustain the life around us. And in that case at Standing Rock, especially the water, because it's the source of life, right? Miniwakoni, water is life. So this message and these phrases kind of played in the camp all day, kind of like the drone of a bagpipe. And you walked through the camp, people would look at you and say, Miniwakoni, Miniwakoni. Each day ended with a spirit-infused drumming and chanting and offerings. I just in my lens and in my experience, I found Standing Rock was just a daily liturgy of resurrection. And it was an altar of a kind of a graced anarchism. As we know the tradition of the Native Americans, there is not a lot of hope in the structures of the political, social, economic existing structures for them. An altar of graced anarchism in the cathedral of the earth. So I can't help but think that a Catholic worker could relate to this experience. The resurrection of lost spirit, finding yourself at a Catholic worker community. The work and the camaraderie. And that graced alternative community. That anarchistic refusal to continue participating directly and be a compliant constituent in that political, economic, militaristic structure of oppression and environmental destruction. And having a moral and spiritual compass in the wisdom speaker, Dorothy Day. So that's my simple analogy, drawn from just imagining a comparison between what my experience at Standing Rock and what I might imagine one experiencing being enveloped in the grace of the Catholic worker movement. And a concluding thought. As we draw our planet closer and closer to environmental disaster, the social structures and processes that have accompanied us up to this point are not going to be the ones to lead us out. If we have a future, it will be Standing Rock. And if that's true, the legacy of Dorothy Day and the ongoing existence of the Catholic movement, Catholic worker movement, is a precious, necessary urban Standing Rock for the days ahead. Thank you.